Thank you so much, Rajan. I'm delighted to be here, and thank you so much to all of you for sticking around for the last plenary of the day. It's going to be a good conversation. This is a topic that is very close to my heart, both professionally and personally. Professionally, I've written about nature-based tourism as a journalist, as an author, and personally, I spent 5 years living in a little village in the French Alps that's surrounded by beautiful nature, and that nature attracts several 100,000 visitors every year. So I have seen firsthand both the challenges and the opportunities of bringing a huge amount of visitors into a pristine natural environment. So I won't say anything else because I want to invite our panelists on stage to get into this topic. So let me introduce to you, we have Nate Hughes, the Director of Research at the World Travel and Tourism Council. Thanks, Nate. We have Sandra Carabao, Director of Tourism Market Intelligence, Policies and Competitiveness at the World Tourism Organization. We have Nina Kovac, Tourism Product Development Team Leader, USAID Developing Sustainable Tourism in Bosnia and Herzegovina. And finally, we have Andrej Kistal, State Secretary, Ministry of Culture, Republic of Moldova. All right, everyone, thank you so much for joining me here. I'm excited to have this conversation. And I thought we've talked about the value of nature and the importance of the beautiful environment, but one thing that we don't always think about, immediately off the bat is the economic value of our natural assets. So to kick things off, I thought I'd ask Nate if you could talk a little bit about the business case for nature-positive tourism. What does this have to offer, and what is the economic value of this type of tourism?
Thanks for the question. Before I answer, I want to say I've been to Bosnia Herzegovina 20 years ago, actually in Sarajevo, and I have seen such a huge progress over the last decades. So it's an impressive task in moving tourism to the next level. And it is also perfectly positioned to actually benefit from nature-based tourism. Now back to your question. Travel and tourism and nature are inextricably linked. Around 80% of tourism's value is reliant on the nature's ecosystems. And over half of all tours globally are linked with nature exploration. Now, nature-based tourism is going to see huge growth going forward. We expect nature-based tourism to generate over $660 billion annually by 2030. So these are really impressive figures, and it just shows the importance to protect the nature and our ecosystems that we very much depend on. Now, recognizing the importance of nature-based tourism, in 2022, we formed a partnership with WTTC, with UN Tourism and Sustainable Hospitality Alliance to make nature-positive tourism a reality by 2030. And we also recently launched a report on this very important topic. So through this first joint publication, we're not only reinforcing our efforts to support the transformation, but also sharing valuable insights on initiating and sustaining these necessary changes. And our mission is clear: we want to become net nature positive by 2030.
Great, thank you, Nate. And just to pick apart, I'm kind of a word person, so to pick apart net nature positive, what does that mean in practice? Like, what does that look like? What's an example of that?
Yeah. So it's giving back to nature more than we are taking back. And we have some great case studies around the world which are trying to be net positive. I have recently returned from Rwanda, a country which was devastated by genocide in the 90s, and now it has moved to a thriving economy supported by tourism and nature, of course. And a share of all tourism revenues is recycled, reinvested back into nature preservation and local communities.
That's fantastic. I think so often when we think of tourism, we can think of it as something that's kind of extractive, but really if we can harness that power in support of tourism, it can actually provide a really powerful economic incentive for preserving some of our most pristine natural landscapes. So, And Nina, I'd love to turn to you because I know you've been working a lot with communities here in Bosnia on how to help them to benefit from some of these nature-based tourism activities. Tell us about that work and what you've been learning about it. What have you been learning from it so far?
Thank you. Thank you so much, Paige. And thank you to all in the audience. I know that it's very late in the afternoon. Hopefully we will ignite your imagination with some of the things that we will share and some of the best practices that we have been witnessing even in Bosnia Herzegovina over the last 3.5 years. So back to the topic of nature-based world tourism. We're not in a better setting than Bosnia Herzegovina. I have to say that I am obviously biased because I am a local, but the fact that we have over half the country covered in forest and wooded ground, the fact that we have one of Europe's last primeval forests where there has been no human interaction for the last millennia, the fact that we have an abundance of freshwater resources, lakes, rivers, waterfalls, really puts us in a position to develop nature-based rural tourism. That is not going to take place by itself. So that is what we have been doing at USAID Tourism, is really taking the tested models, proven models from elsewhere, global best practices, and seeing how they can be adapted and thrive in the setting of Bosnia and Herzegovina, taking well into account the fact that we do want to preserve that pristine nature and not in any way cause harm. So what we've been doing over the last 3 years is piloting the model or supporting the implementation of the model of Most Beautiful Villages of Bosnia and Herzegovina as a model that has been taken, so to say, from France, that has been very successful in leading this initiative over the last 40 years. I'm sure, Paige, you were able to witness it maybe firsthand living in the village.
One of the most beautiful villages in France.
Well, we're still
5 miles, so a little bit proud. Yeah.
We're in the early stages of the development, but even here in Bosnia and Herzegovina, with the local champion that is leading this overall initiative, the Association for Rural Development, Alta Rural, we are seeing a thriving of the villages. And the important credos of this model are, and this is what I want to really highlight, is that we want, through this program, to preserve the natural ecosystems, to preserve the cultural heritage, to give visibility and promotion to the villages, because some hubs in Bosnia and Herzegovina are receiving a good influx of tourists. We want to see the spread of the tourists to the villages. So another important aspect of the overall model is promotion and support of economic development of the villages. We want to see the villages thrive. So some of the, so to say, key achievements thus far is that under the leadership of Alta Rural and through the development of an entire quality system with a quality commission that is based on standards of preservation of the overall ecosystem and the cultural heritage, 17 villages in Bosnia and Herzegovina have been labeled as Most Beautiful Villages. A website, a very informative website has been launched with an interactive map of all the villages. I invite you all to have a look at it. It stands for the acronym of Most Beautiful Villages, mbv.ea. And most recently, we have been, or Bosnia and Herzegovina has been accepted to the World Federation of Most Beautiful Villages of the Earth, joining over 800 villages of the world that have been labeled as Most Beautiful Villages. So it's a lot that is already taking place, but more to come.
Well, congratulations. That sounds like you've made some wonderful progress there. I'm curious to ask you, what kind of reactions do you see? I mean, I imagine it's a variety of them, but what kind of reactions are you seeing from the communities that you're working with? Because I imagine these are places that are really probably not used to welcoming tourists. So is that kind of a bit of a mindset shift then?
Obviously, there has to be an awareness and mindset shifts that are taking place, and not everyone is ready at the same development level, but those that are leading the way, so to say, are the ones then that are trailing, that are basically the trailblazers. And just going back to what Nate was saying about having a more positive impact on nature, 2 weeks ago at Krokoško Lake, which is one of the most beautiful villages of Bosnia Herzegovina, the local authorities reintroduced a long-lost endemic species of a newt into the lake. And it's these kinds of examples that are not wide and far and spread out, but they are setting the change and an example for others then to follow. So the future does look positive. There's a lot more to be done on value chain development, on having the tour operators and agencies put the villages in their itineraries. We also want to work very much on expanding our strategic alliances and international networks, which is why we're very happy to have Sandra here with us today from Tourism, because some of the villages in Bosnia Herzegovina have applied and some are even successful in the upgrade program of Tourism's best tourism villages. And we see this as a networking opportunity, a learning opportunity. It's very important for the villages themselves to belong to such networks.
Well, thank you. That's the perfect segue. To Sandra, I would love to ask you to tell us about the Best Tourism Villages program, which I understand is about 3 years old now. So how is that going so far? What have you learned, and what lessons can we pull from that program to this region?
Perfect, thank you, Kate. Well, I can say we had a very, very enriching lunch with the most beautiful villages of Bosnia. And I think this is the spirit we also see in our initiative. It all started, actually the first recognitions came at the end of 2021, so it's a very, very young program. And it's based on our belief that first we need to ensure that tourism benefits are spread out in the countries, and also that we need a stronger collaboration between the local and the national level. So the process is always driven by the ministries of tourism, so they're the ones pre-selecting in the way that they decide their villages that they present. And then we have an independent advisory board that goes through their candidacies. So far we've recognized 129 villages around the world. And we have a network that's not only with recognized villages, but as it was mentioned, we have a figure that we call the upgrade program, so the ones who are very close to getting the recognition, but we do think they need support. And what we do is we give them mentoring, so a dedicated mentor goes to the village, works with them in the areas that they were less developed in the assessment. And we had a very good feedback from the upgrade program at lunch as well, because we've seen a lot of things, for example, creating an association that deals with tourism. And now we're getting the people together to manage also, not, as you were saying, the positives, but also the challenges, no? So I think for us, the most important learnings, and I always quote a village from Switzerland, which you wouldn't imagine. Once I asked them, what was the biggest benefit for you? And they said, well, now the government doesn't exist. So for us, that's a very important point, that collaboration among government level, local level. We've seen a lot of the villages also how the pride in their village has increased and how probably they now feel more committed to work together. And for us also the fact that we have 55 countries. Actually imagine a village in Japan working with a village in Africa. So there's a lot of relationships even between them. We have now the ones in Japan creating a national chapter as well, so that they can learn from each other. So we're really seeing that it's picking up. We hope also that this can help policies at national level to change, because we do know that we need that support in terms of regulation, in terms of infrastructure. We did an assessment of 200 candidacies to identify what were the challenges, and the top challenge is always infrastructure. So it is why it's very important to connect them with a national level. So we're very happy with the program, and it's actually part of a bigger program which is called Tourism for Rural Development. And there's other initiatives. We're currently working on launching a small grant program for NGOs also in rural areas. We're trying to build partnerships with grant supporters in financial terms, because we also know that at local level it's very hard to access often any kind of financing. And this is another challenge that most of the villages identified. And we also just launched an online tool for villages to assess where they are as well, so they can just go online and do their own self-assessment. So hopefully little by little this agenda becomes important for the countries themselves.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting. I mean, you said that the biggest challenge is infrastructure. And I wonder on the human capital side as well, in terms of training people or even kind of retaining people in the village. I imagine there's a lot of movement towards cities and things. Can you talk a bit about managing the kind of the human side of this challenge?
Actually, when we started the program, one of the objectives of the program is to help countries fight new population, because it is a challenge that goes from east to west, north to south of our planet. In Japan, it's a big issue. Here, it's a big issue. Everywhere, people are leaving cities, and getting into the cities also is a challenge, because you have a bigger population that you need to manage. So what we are seeing is, first of all, training. Obviously, services, and this comes when we were talking about infrastructure. Obviously, if you have a business, then you have an opportunity to stay, but your kids need to go to school, and you need to have health facilities. So it is all a package of policies and investment that needs to be there. And this is why for us as well, the value chain integration is very important. If you see that, you are a farmer, but your business is very limited and you don't see any future, then you will go somewhere else. But I think there's also a good opportunity now with new trends, nomad visas, and with the things that it might impact on cities, but in rural areas we're seeing a lot of creative solutions. In Spain, there's a lot of accommodation units creating co-working spaces actually in rural areas. So I think it's an opportunity. We've seen after the pandemic people want to go to areas which are less populated as well. So I think it is the moment that we take tourism as a driver of that development.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I love to think about tourism as a way to really encourage people to explore beyond the cities. And I know in my little village, I mean, without tourism, it would have become a ghost town, probably like in the 1960s or 70s or something. Just the whole movement, especially in Europe, since the Industrial Revolution, since the end of World War II, towards the cities, has really emptied out the countryside. And with tourism, maybe we're starting to see a bit of a shift back in the other direction. And Andre, I know that community tourism, agritourism, wine tourism, these are all things that you're working on a lot in Moldova at the moment. Can you tell me about how that's going and what kind of reactions you're getting from the communities you're working with?
First of all, thank you very much for the invitation, for joining this important panel. Yes, for sure, as already Sandra mentioned, after the pandemic, rural areas become somehow special attention to many foreign tourism, local tourism as well. And for sure, here we need to come with some very constructive, innovative approach to how we involve community, how we work with the community in developing tourism through there. I would like to start by thanking first of all Sandra for the Best Tourist Village for this very inspiring initiative. I think this is somehow the model that we should to take at national level on how to work with local communities, how we involve local communities in developing tourism in their village, and how we explain, how we develop educational programs for that. That's why, but this somehow comes with some maybe constraint or difficulties, because the pressure that go to local communities, somehow we should manage it. We should anticipate some of the effects that we should see with them. That's why somehow a balance between the development, the tourist development, and the protection of rural traditions, rural heritage, it's very important. That's why we, together with USAID. USAID working model for the last 10 years in tourism, and we already have an approach on how to develop tourism at rural area. That's why more constructive discussion, more consultation with local communities, more explanation of why is important tourism for the, not just for promoting the village, but developing the economic activities, social activities, educational activities are very important, and we somehow succeed in the last year to run some activities but somehow help local communities to be more involved in that activities. You mentioned about agriculture, ecotourism, wine tourism. Yes, for sure, these are our, let's say, important assets of tourism development, and we, together with our colleagues from USAID, from ministry sides, we succeed now to finalize the national program for tourism development, and rural tourism and the development of touristic products are on the top priorities on that program. So that's why we discuss and we succeed already to include tourism as one of the important elements of local and regional development, based on the programs that already the government have, even it's on agriculture, economic development, on environment, we succeed to include through tourism, and there is already somehow an important element of our development in our country.
Fantastic, and I love what you were sharing about the involvement of the communities you're working with, and that's really continuing a theme that Nina and Sandra Burgos is speaking to as well. And I'd like to just ask you to maybe explain in a little bit more detail what that actually looks like in practice. Like, are you having kind of town hall meetings? Are you doing kind of surveys? Are you meeting with individual kind of community leaders? How do you actually do that at a really practical level?
Well, there are different types of consultations that we already started. As I mentioned, we just a couple of weeks ago we signed an assessment together with some ministries on developing a clear vision on local and regional development of tourism. And for sure, this is an important platform that we set, and for sure this will help us to have more instruments for consultations and for development. But for sure, we set some activities. First of all, it's to have a clear and inclusive strategy of communication with local communities. We organize the training for them, we organize the activities for them. Another important project that are financed by the World Tourism Organization is empowering women from rural areas. And we succeed to organize many activities, trainings, and campaigns, and we see a lot of interest from women's side to develop business in tourism. That's why we will continue such activities. We will involve local communities in decision-making process, because it's very important to listen the will of the communities, but in the same time to explain why it's important to develop and how we should develop tourism in their villages. Second, it's you mentioned about natural parks. Yes, for sure. This is an important element of our strategy, and we work closely with the communities, especially the communities that are located in some natural reserves. Why is it important to protect the natural reserves, and how you can help our national authorities on promoting and developing natural reserves. Some of the examples, for example, we have a cultural natural reserve, which is Orhei Lake, where we succeed to develop a balanced strategy between the tourist development and the protection of cultural and natural resources. That's why, and that is the best model when we succeed to organize many important events, but for sure taking care about the cultural heritage, rural traditions, natural reserves, and other aspects that are important for them. That's why this approach based on the consultations and based on community involvement, based on educational and trainings activities are very important to set a clear strategy for rural tourist development in the communities.
Fantastic, thank you. Because, I mean, I guess, you know, those consultations are so important because without the social support, without the community support for tourism, then it's really, you know, that's essential to tourism functioning in that community.
For sure it's not easy, but explaining the added value of tourist development, it's very important at the beginning to set a clear consultation mechanism with them.
And then of course the real sort of the biggest asset, I guess, that, you know, that kind of drew us here today on this panel is the natural world, right? That's really that these communities are first in line to protect, and that is, you know, drawing these tourists to the place, and without that natural asset, then there is no tourism, you know, in that area. So, I mean, Nate, maybe I would turn back to you, and how can we help, you know, private sector, communities, government understand that nature really needs to be a priority, you know, in their strategies around tourism?
Right, so that's why we're here today.
Yeah.
So I would say we established this partnership with UN Tourism and Sustainable Hospitality Alliance. So it's really sort of pushing out this message on the importance of protecting the nature, you know, driving investment into nature as a preservation programs, and so on. Also, you know, providing data and forming partnerships between public, private sectors, local communities, making sure that communities are empowered to make decisions and involved in the consultation processes.
Would anyone else like to speak to that? How you make sure that the partners you're working with see nature as a really important, you know, as a driver here?
Well, I think there's an interesting point that was made regarding policy coordination. We'll talk about putting tourism in the agenda of the Agriculture Ministry, of the Rural Development or Territorial or Regional Development. And I think it's the same with the environmental component, or the ministry who in the country is in charge of natural resources. It is important that tourism is part of their agenda as well, because it's, as we were saying, you know, it is an asset. It's also challenged by if you have flows which are not managed properly. So we do need to have that cross-governmental coordination besides national and local coordination, because often it has to do with regulation. You need to have regulation in place, because otherwise you can't manage specific flows. It has to do with sharing benefits as well. I think it was mentioned a very good example from Rwanda, where actually the communities around the national parks benefit from the income of the park. And there's a shared benefit for everyone. And I think this, obviously, they see the benefit of visitation. And we also saw it during the pandemic, how much the parks were suffering, because a lot of their income for their own activities, even for having people who fight against poaching, come from tourism income. So I think, again, that balance of making sure that the revenues are used in a proper way, but at the same time that we are a part of a bigger chain.
Yeah, Dina, I mean, I think the importance of collaboration, partnerships, not getting fragmented across like different levels or branches of government. What has your experience been like with that here in Bosnia?
Just to add, I would say, answer your question to what Sandra was just now saying, I was thinking that it is a combination of top-down and bottom-up approaches and pulls and different, so to say, instigators, because it's really important to have strategies in place. And here in Bosnia, we were working as USAID Tourism Project to support entity ministries to develop sustainable tourism strategies, or for developing a sustainable tourism in the future, whereby rural and nature-based tourism were very much highlighted. We were also working with national parks across the country to help them come up with management plans and how to manage their visitors that are also based on sustainability principles. But I'm also seeing that bottom up, that the industry itself is feeling the need to be more respectful of nature. We were talking today about climate change. We're talking about the ski resorts already seeing lack of snow, so they understand the need to be more appreciative of nature and more conservation focused. And it's around the globe, I would say, that this kind of demand that is coming from the market itself, travelers looking for more sustainable options where they're going and really wanting to understand that where they come, all the different places, all the different activities are not causing any further harm to the environment or to the local community. So it is a combination of all. And for Bosnia and Herzegovina, because of the fact that we have such a fragmented administrative approach, our key, so to say, go-to method is always to have this highly participatory approach to everything. So invite everyone, and this was the case with the villages as well. Some of them have, so to say, the key agents of change, those that are drivers, and that are then leading the change with others, as you said, changing the mindset, creating an awareness among others who then follow.
And I think you make a really important point that actually it's not just the destinations preparing, it's actually the travelers and tourists are really looking for this kind of experience now. And I remember actually reporting on this just as we were kind of coming out of the lockdowns of the pandemic, that nature destinations across Europe were in some places inundated by visitors. I remember talking to national park managers in Germany and Switzerland and France and Spain who were just like, oh my gosh, we were overwhelmed with all of these people. And there was often people who lived maybe half an hour away or 2 hour drive away who were coming and discovering their local natural area for the first time. And they were all saying, isn't this a wonderful development? And, oh my God, we weren't ready. This trend is continuing now, I guess. Or would anybody else like to speak to that? Or did you see that in Moldova at all? Or have you seen this trend sort of, coming out in surveys or anything?
Well, I can share what we've seen, and I think there's an important point on what you said. People that live half an hour away and never been to the parks. I think rural tourism is, in essence, domestic tourism, because if you look at the data, most of the visitors in rural areas will be domestic visitors. You will have in some destinations which are more prominent, maybe a development where international has already taken a significant part, but it is important to build that level of demand with domestic market and understand the domestic market. And I think the pandemic brought that opportunity because many people had never been to certain places. Just, I can give you the example. I live in Madrid and I had no idea that half an hour away there was a wine route. So I discovered a wine route half an hour away from Madrid. And I think with a lot of people this happened. And then there's two things. If this experience is good, obviously you will return, even if you have now other options. But we also need to be aware that there has been a peak, obviously, after the pandemic, and now we will have a natural slowdown, but in a higher level, because there is higher demand. We actually did a study with the Committee of the Regions of the European Union to look at European policy, and we see that there is an increase in overnights in most of the countries. There's an increasing demand, but again, we need to create that national demand, because that will always be the basis for rural areas.
What we are seeing as well, we do see the return to cities. Having said that, there's opportunity for cities as well as for rural areas to benefit from this trend, from the extended stay. So why not go to the city break and then extend the stay onto the rural areas for some adventure or nature-based tourism and so on?
Yes, for sure. I think it's Sandra already mentioned very important aspect. It's like it's like a best place to visit. It's the best place to live. It's the best place to visit. And yes, for sure, we need more sustainable practices to be implemented. And for sure, from both sides, it's in domestic or it's for tourism. Respect for the for the natural reserve that we have. It's very important that we should work at the ST level, capacity building level, to invest in the respect of the traditions that we have in our communities. But even it's a big challenge in many of the countries, because from one side we face the infrastructure programs and challenge that we have, business environment development, but at the same time we should take care of all the authentic element that we have in our region. That's why we are facing the same challenge. What is more important is to have this clear vision on how we develop rural tourism by involving local communities.
Okay, thank you. Well, we have 5 minutes left, and I'd love to just kind of take the conversation in a slightly different direction and think about what happens when we have a natural area or a rural tourism destination, and we actually end up getting more people than we sort of anticipated or prepared for. Because this is something I've seen as a journalist in Iceland, for instance, where you have really remote, spectacular natural areas that were kind of created on social media through sort of geolocation tagging, and lots of visitors arriving unexpectedly. Is this something that you're thinking about in your work, or you're preparing for, or how do we guard against the possibility that we actually end up with an influx of people that we're not prepared for? Just to anybody who would like to speak to that. Yeah.
So it's all about balancing demand and supply. Of course, we get imbalances. So it's important to understand the carrying capacity of the destination, and if needed, like a penetrating investment into infrastructure and connectivity if needed. But it's also important to use technology maybe to attract visitors throughout the seasons and throughout the whole day, rather than concentrating that in a specific time period.
I can perhaps share one of the best practices that we have launched here in Bosnia Herzegovina, the model of hub and spokes, recognizing the fact that we do have some tourist hubs that are not suffering from over-tourism as we were talking about today in Paris or Madrid, but still having more tourism than they can handle at certain peaks. So how do we disperse the tourists into other less traveled areas? And the hub and spokes is basically a model whereby we, as a project, worked on mapping all the different activities, experiences, products that are in the vicinity of these hubs, and worked to make sure that these are communicated to both domestic and international travelers so that they get ideas. So if you are in a place a day or two, but there, you understand that in the vicinity of maybe half an hour drive from the place where you're staying, and you can do X, Y, Z, different activities from outdoor to cultural, from historical to gastronomic, it helps alleviate then the pressure on those areas that are recognized as hubs.
Yeah, interesting. And I'm curious, Sandra, have you, in any of your best tourism villages, have you seen this phenomenon?
Yeah. It has come because we also have a big diversity. We have villages who already have a significant level of visitation, and others who are in a different level of development. Also because the assessment is done on 9 areas of evaluation that go beyond just the cultural or natural values. We enter very much into policies to support sustainability, social, environmental, and economic terms. So we have villages with initiatives, for example, on accessibility that are valued for that. So it's a mix of actually an evaluation that goes beyond just how beautiful or the resources that might exist. But we do have villages who face those challenges, and we've actually tried to bring them to share what they're doing also with the ones that are growing and to avoid that. I think there's probably, again, coming to the management, it has to be a territorial management where you look at, dispersal around the village, but also in time, because often it happens that you might go to a village in the Alps which is full in winter, but it's not full in summer. So how do you create the interest of people to travel there in summer? Do you need to have a system of parking, for example, outside the village that you don't have to disturb everyone with everyone passing in the middle of the streets of the villages with too many people? There's places where you might just need to regulate that you don't have group tours, for example, and you only have individual tours where people, and you might need to close areas of the village to visitation. I think at the end of the day, there's no solution that fits all, because each destination, either you're very big or you're very small, will have their own challenges and their own approaches to make it more sustainable. No, I think one of the important things is, first of all, to have a vision of what you want to be. And, some villages might say, I don't want to be tourism. I'm fully agriculture and this is a sector that I don't want to develop. I think, it is important that there's that vision. It's important that you have a governance. You need an entity that manages the sector, because otherwise you don't know where to go or how to go, and you don't know to manage the challenges. And you need to be part of a wider vision for a region. It's like we also don't want a country or a village to be 100% economically dependent on any sector, and tourism is not an exception. So we need to find that balance as well.
Yeah, well, custom-made solutions, I think that's really, an answer to so many tourism challenges. We are out of time, but thank you so much to the panelists, and thank you so much to the audience for sticking around.